Alright, good afternoon. Hope that your day was a good one. We're going to start today with section 10.4, area of triangles. Now what we need to know first is where does this formula come from, which the formula for area of a triangle is 1/2 the base times height, or you could take the base times the height and divide it by 2. Basically you're taking half of whatever the answer is of the base times height. Well, what we learned yesterday is that the base times the height is the formula for a parallelogram. So the question is, where does this formula come from? Well, here's the similarity between the base times the height from the parallelogram. You're taking half of it. So if you're taking half of the formula of a parallelogram, then obviously we are looking at a parallelogram which looks like this. That was the same thing basically for that parallelogram. Another situation that you could be looking at is just a simple rectangle, which is also a parallelogram. Taking half of that creates a triangle, two triangles. That's why we divide it by 2. So that's where this formula comes from. Base is always what you're going to be looking at where there is a 90-degree angle, the right angle sign. And then our height is going to be from the opposite, from that, basically perpendicular from that right angle to the top. That is going to give us our height. So now we're going to use it in finding the area of this triangle. Now since this triangle is upside down, they place some identification lines in here to give you an idea just of the height and of the base, which you could have also looked at it coming from this direction to the top and put your 90-degree angle here, but it's upside down. So it's the same concept, it's measuring the same lengths and distances, but they measure it from the outside instead of inside the triangle. So first example again, we have 3 different numbers here, but you're not going to need all 3 numbers, because if you recall our formula being 1/2 the base times the height, or base times height divided by 2, it's going to end up that you only need 2 of those. So we have to identify which one is the base, which one is the height. Well, again, as we mentioned, the base is always going to be whatever that distance is from the length, the bottom. It's the longest distance is going to be your base. So we get 16 centimeters, taking it times half, times what is my height? Well, it's how tall this is. It has to be related to that 90-degree angle. Here's the 90-degree angle that they gave you. That's what you have to measure it from. That is your height. This is actually what we call the hypotenuse, and we're going to talk more about that in class tomorrow, the hypotenuse and the relationship it has between the other two. So 8 centimeters. Now you're going to simply multiply those together. You can simply plug those in a calculator, or you can multiply them by hand, doesn't matter. 16 times 8 is going to give you 48, and then 8 times 1 is 8, plus 4 is, is 12. Not letting me do it. Here we go. 8 plus 1, or 8 times 1 is 8, plus the 4 is our 12. So we have a 128, and then remember we have to multiply that by 1/2, or you can take that number and divide it by 2, which is exactly the same thing. And you say, well, how can that be? Well, if we take 128 over 1 times 1/2, that is the exact same thing. You can cross reduce, which is 1, divide this, and you get your 64, which is 64 over 1, equaling 64. That's the point being made here. That's the similarities. If you take the 128 and simply divide it by 2, you will again get your 6, subtract, get 0, bring down the 8, and you're 464. So again, it doesn't matter which method you use. This method I think you will probably use the most. In fact, that's the one that I would prefer you probably use, dividing it by 2 instead of taking it by 1/2. But again, you can do it either way. You can make this into a decimal as well, to where it's 0.5 times 16 times 8. You're still going to get the same answer of 64. Now that's not your final answer. It is 64, yes, units of measurement, and we are dealing with area. Therefore, it is square centimeters. That's what you're trying to find, how many little square units fit inside of this triangle. Okay, next question, I'm going to have you go ahead and hit pause, and you're trying to find the units. Remember, the base times the height. There is no numbers on here. It is all based on units of measurement. So go ahead and get started. You may begin. Hit pause, and I'll be back in a few. Okay, now you're going to have to, again, add these units up. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 units long. And then how many going up? You have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, and this would be a half. So we have times 11.5, and again we're going to divide this by 2. Alright, so then you end up multiplying these together, and I get 103.50 or 0.5 over 2, and when you take that number and divide by 2, you get 51.75, 51 and 75 hundredths. And again, it is dealing with units, so it's just a matter of literally writing units squared. So make certain that you have your square units of measurement on here. That's your final answer. And again, it's a matter of measuring each one of those, or looking at each one of those line segments. Now some of you looking at this might say, well, that line is only half. It's not. Look at this point to this point. How many line segments long is that? And you can see that's one whole line segment. We can't worry about what's above it. We're measuring that particular line. So here was 11, and here's the half. Okay, not worried about what's all out here and how much of that square is filled in. It's the segment that it's created. That's how you measure it. So go ahead and do the next one. Go ahead and hit pause, and you may begin. And Alright, for letter C, again, it's a matter of finding what is my base, what is my height, because you have 3 different measurements here. Again, it all revolves around this 90-degree angle. This is my base, my longest measurement. So again, my formula, base times height divided by 2. So we're going to plug those numbers in. 12 is my base times the height, which is 6. 13.5 is what we call the hypotenuse. That is the angle or the line that is opposite of the right angle. Okay, that line is always the longer line. We'll explain that more in class again tomorrow, but the hypotenuse is always the longer line segment. Divided by 2, and when we multiply 12 times 6, we get 72 over 2, which then gives me 36, and we're talking about inches, so it is square inches. Please again take a look at your notes. If you have any questions, please write them down and be ready to ask them in class. Hope you have a great evening. Thanks.